The forest path was quiet after school, just the sound of leaves under their shoes as Amelia walked with her son Noah. A breath of wind moved through the pines, and then she heard it, a whisper from somewhere below her feet, so soft it could have been wind in the grass. She stopped and listened again, heart knocking hard in her chest. Noah tugged her sleeve and pointed at a patch of fresh soil where a thick root crossed the ground like a crooked arm. She dropped to her knees and brushed away leaves with quick hands. Her fingers hit cold metal, a small rusted vent almost swallowed by earth. A weak voice rose from the dark space below, asking for help. Instinct took over. She poured a little water through the grate, then clawed at the soil, nails tearing, palms burning, using a stick as a lever until the hidden hatch screamed and finally gave. A wave of foul, warm air rose up. A man lay inside, barely conscious. Amelia reached down and pulled with all her strength. Weeks passed. The man, now known as Liam, had fought his way back from fever and fear. The truth had come out in the bright light of a crowded room, and the people who betrayed him were in handcuffs. Yet the victory that mattered most was still waiting. It lived in a promise to a 12-year-old boy who thought his father was gone forever. On a soft gray morning, Amelia drove with Liam to the school where his son studied. Liam held a small bouquet of blue cornflowers, hands shaking on his knees, lips pressed tight. He asked if he looked all right. Amelia told him yes, because the boy needed his father, not a perfect suit. Inside the common room, a boy sat by the window with a book, shoulders slumped like he had learned to take up less space. Liam stopped, as if the floor might crack. The boy lifted his head. Their eyes matched. The book slipped from his hands and hit the table with a soft thud. "Dad." The word broke out of him like air after a long dive. Liam knelt and the boy ran into his arms. The hug was not neat. It was shaking and tight and real. "I tried to come back," Liam said, voice rough. "I never stopped trying." The boy nodded against his chest and did not let go. That weekend, Julian came home with them. Noah gave him the better pillow without being asked. The boys compared toy cars and argued gently about whose fire truck was faster, then laughed and raced them down the hall. Liam cooked a simple dinner, with Amelia, steady for the first time, like a man who could picture tomorrow. After they ate, he opened a box on the kitchen table and took out a model rocket, the same one he had promised to build before everything went wrong. Julian's eyes widened. They worked side by side, reading the thin paper guide, hands smudged with glue, the small fins lined straight. When the rocket stood finished, Julian whispered, "Thank you, not just for the toy, but for the time." The house changed in quiet ways. A loose porch hinge stopped squeaking. The old fence stood straight again. The shed, once a place of fear, turned into a workbench for small repairs and school projects. At night, Liam read out loud, his voice still a little rough but warm. Noah began to call him Uncle Liam again, this time with a grin that reached both ears. Julian learned the path through the pines and the way the light looks when evening slides, between the trees. Amelia watched the three of them from the doorway, a mug of tea in her hands, a long breath finally leaving her body. Liam met with a lawyer from a small firm in town and signed papers to start a foundation. He called it Reborn, simple and clear, a promise to anyone who had been hurt or left behind. The first office was a room above the library with 2 desks and a kettle. They set up a phone line for people who needed help, not just with money but with guidance and steady company. Amelia handled intake, her voice calm, writing names with care, asking the right questions without pressing too hard. Liam went out, to meet people face to face, bringing them a folder, a plan, and the kind of eye contact that says, "I see you." At the launch night, held in the community center with folding chairs and a string of warm lights, the town showed up with casseroles and paper cups of lemonade. Liam kept his speech short. "They tried to erase me," he said, "but what saved me was kindness." A single mother heard a voice no one else heard and chose to stop and listen. He looked at Amelia in the front row. "Because she listened, I am here. Because she stayed, my son has his father." The room was quiet in the best way. the way people are when they are thinking about what they can do next. Winter came early. One evening, snow began to fall in slow, gentle flakes, catching in the porch light. Inside, the boys spread a blanket by the fire and set the rocket on the coffee table like a flag for a new country. Amelia ladled soup into bowls and passed warm bread. Liam took the picture that now hung in the hall off its nail and brought it to the table. 4 faces close together, no fancy clothes, just easy smiles. He pointed to it and said, "This is what I fought for." Noah asked if the rocket could fly in the snow. Liam said they would wait for a clear day. Then they would run to the field and count down as a team. Later, when the boys were asleep, Amelia stood with Liam at the doorway between their rooms. The house was quiet. He whispered, "Thank you." She shook her head and said, "You did the hard part, you kept breathing." He smiled, a small, tired smile that still carried hope. Outside, the pines held their white coats. Inside, a family held its shape. The past was still there, but it no longer owned the future. They had built something simple and strong, the kind of life that makes space for anyone willing to walk out of the dark and step into the light. Amelia's hands were raw, her nails cracked, but she didn't stop pulling at the rusted hatch. At last the door gave way with a loud groan. She leaned back, panting, then forced herself forward again. The smell hit her first, stale air mixed with sweat and sickness. Her stomach turned, but she pushed her fear down and shone her phone's weak light into the dark space below. There he was, a man lying curled in the shadows, his face ghostly pale beneath streaks of dirt. His lips moved, dry and trembling, as if even speaking cost him strength. "Help," he rasped, barely louder than a breath. Her son Noah stood frozen just behind her. His small hands clutched his backpack straps as his wide eyes followed every move. "Mama," he whispered, "we can't leave him here." Amelia nodded quickly. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her decision was already made. She reached down, stretching her arm as far as she could. "Give me your hand," she said, firm but gentle. At first the man didn't move, his arm hanging like dead weight. She reached further, gripping his wrist tightly. "Come on, I've got you." With a desperate groan, he shifted, and she pulled with all her strength. He was heavier than she, expected, every inch of his body stiff and weak, but she pulled as if her own life depended on it. Her feet dug into the damp ground and her muscles screamed in protest. Finally, with a last surge, she dragged him out onto the forest floor. He collapsed onto the moss, gasping for air. His skin was clammy, his clothes torn and stained with mud. He tried to lift his head, but it dropped back with a thud. His lips moved again, whispering words that were almost too faint to hear. Amelia leaned close and caught them. "I used to have a family, but the one I trusted most buried me alive." His eyes rolled back and he went limp. Amelia's breath hitched. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, relief flooding her when she found a faint pulse. He was alive. Barely, but alive. She stripped Noah's small poncho from his shoulders and wrapped it around the man's trembling body. Then she pulled out her phone and held it up, searching desperately for a signal. Nothing. Only 1 bar flickered, then vanished. She bit her lip hard, making a quick decision. The shed at home was close enough, and she couldn't risk running through the woods in the dark with a dying man on her back. "We're taking him home," she told Noah. Her son didn't argue, didn't even hesitate. He just nodded, the seriousness in his young face making her chest ache. It took all of Amelia's strength to half carry, half drag the man along the narrow forest path. Noah followed, holding the flashlight steady, his small figure like a brave little soldier. Every few steps, Amelia felt the man's weight sag more against her. She whispered encouragements, even though he was too far gone to hear. "Stay with me. You'll be safe. Just hold on." By the time they reached their small cottage, her arms trembled and her back ached. She couldn't take him inside, not yet, not with Noah watching and neighbors who might ask questions. Instead, she guided him into the shed behind the house. The air inside smelled of old wood, paint cans, and dust. It was a place of forgotten things. Tonight, it would have to be a sanctuary. Amelia laid him on an old cot, covering him with faded quilts. His body shook violently, sweat pouring down his face. She recognized the signs of fever and infection. Memories of her husband's last days rushed back, but she swallowed them down. She couldn't break now. She found the old remedies she had kept tucked away, yarrow, willow bark, elderflower, and began brewing a mixture on a small stove. When the tea cooled, she spooned drops carefully into his cracked lips. He flinched, then swallowed weakly. A faint groan escaped him, but it was better than silence. Amelia brushed damp hair from his forehead and whispered, "You're safe now. I don't know who you are or what happened to you, but you're safe here." The man shifted restlessly, mumbling names through cracked lips. Clement, Vera. The words were fractured, raw, but heavy with meaning. Amelia sat by his side through the night, her hand resting lightly on his wrist, feeling the erratic beat of his pulse. She refused to leave him alone. Later, she returned with a bowl of broth. His eyes opened for the first time with clarity, though they still carried exhaustion and pain. She fed him slowly, one spoonful at a time. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her face, filled with disbelief and something else, gratitude buried deep beneath the suffering. "You don't have to talk," she whispered softly. "Just get strong. That's all that matters now." Outside, the wind rattled the shed window like a warning that the world outside was still dangerous. But inside, the small glow of the lantern lit a fragile truth. Amelia had pulled a man back from the edge of death, and whether she wanted it or not, his life was now bound to hers. She tucked the quilts tighter around him and stepped back. In that moment, watching him fight for each shallow breath, Amelia understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was not an accident. Whoever had left him buried in the woods had wanted him gone. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase him. But fate had placed her and Noah on that path. Fate had made her hear the whisper, and fate had made her stop. The man in the shed drifted between sleep and fever. Sometimes he stirred, lips moving, mumbling words Amelia could barely catch. "Clement, Vera, why?" His voice cracked like broken glass, heavy with betrayal. Amelia sat by him, watching, trying to understand. She had heard the names before but didn't know what they meant. All she knew was that this man had been left in the ground like he was nothing. In the stillness of night, when Noah was fast asleep inside the cottage, Amelia remained in the shed with the lantern burning low. She held the stranger's wrist, counting the faint beat beneath his skin. She whispered to herself, "You're not alone. You won't be alone now." It was the same promise she had made to her husband years ago when sickness had stolen him too soon. She had sat by his side night after night, feeding him broth, cooling his fever, holding his hand when the pain was too much. She had sworn then that no one she loved would ever face darkness by themselves. Now, somehow, fate had given her another broken soul to protect. By dawn, the man's fever eased. His eyes opened for longer stretches, clearer now but filled with a tired sadness that went beyond the physical pain. Amelia brought him water in a chipped ceramic cup and helped him sit up. His hands trembled, the cup rattling against his teeth, but he drank. "You're safe here," she told him gently, adjusting the quilt around his shoulders. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice dry and rough, he whispered, "I was buried alive." The words made Amelia's skin prickle. She leaned closer, careful not to push. "Who did this to you?" His eyes shifted, glassy with pain, but focused on her face as if searching for something. Maybe trust, maybe disbelief. His lips parted. "The people I loved most, my wife, my friend, they wanted me gone." He coughed and she quickly steadied, him with her hand on his back. When the coughing fit passed, he lay back against the pillows, breathing hard. "I was a CEO," he continued, voice shaking. "I built something good, clinics, medicine for families who couldn't afford it. I thought I was helping people, I thought I was proud." His eyes grew distant, staring past the shed ceiling as if he could still see the life that had been stolen. But Vera, my wife, Clement, my closest friend, they betrayed me. They wanted the company, the money, everything, so they took me out of it, not just the boardroom, out of life. Amelia's breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but she saw the strain in his face, the way every word cost him strength. Instead, she simply listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He closed his eyes, his voice dropping lower. But the worst part isn't what they did to me. It's my son, Julian, 12 years old. I promised him we'd build a rocket kit that night. I never came home. He must think I abandoned him, that I didn't love him enough to fight back. His face twisted with pain far deeper than any wound, and a single tear slipped down his cheek. Amelia reached for his hand without thinking. His skin was cold, but his fingers curled weakly around hers. You didn't abandon him, she said firmly. You're here. You're alive. And that means you still have a chance to get back to him. For the first time, the man's eyes softened, glistening as they locked with hers. He whispered, barely audible. It was his face that kept me breathing in that hole, his laughter, his name. I whispered it to myself until my voice broke, and then I heard yours. I heard your son trip on the roots. I thought it was a dream, but you heard me. Amelia nodded, her throat tight. I did, and I'm not leaving you. The air in the shed shifted. It was no longer just a place of hiding, but a place of fragile beginnings. The man, once buried by betrayal, was finding life again, not because of wealth or revenge, but because someone had chosen to stop, to listen and to care. In the days that followed, Amelia nursed him with patience. She brought broth, stitched torn fabric into fresh bandages, and reminded Noah only that the shed was a place for Mama's work. Secret to keep safe. Noah accepted it with the innocence of a child, though his eyes carried a wisdom beyond his years. He knew enough not to question. The stranger grew stronger each day. He began to sit up on his own, his voice steadier, though still cracked. Sometimes, when Amelia caught him staring out the shed window, his face was shadowed with anger. Other times when Noah peeked in with a smile or a toy, the man's expression softened, almost like a father remembering what it felt like to care. He still had not told her his full name, but Amelia didn't press. To her, he was Liam now, a name she had given him in that first desperate night, a name that tethered him back to the living. One evening, as she folded laundry in the kitchen, she noticed something small but striking. Noah's torn jacket, which she had meant to throw away, lay neatly mended on the sewing table. The stitches were even, careful, almost invisible. She turned, and there he was, Liam, sitting quietly by the window with a mug of tea. He said nothing, but his eyes met hers with a quiet strength. That night, Amelia realized he was no longer just a man she had saved. He was someone who had begun to stitch himself into the fabric of her life, one careful piece at a time. Days passed, and the stranger Amelia had named Liam grew stronger, though his body still carried the marks of what he had endured. His wrists bore angry red bands where restraints had once cut deep, and his voice still rasped with effort when he spoke. Yet his eyes were clearer now, less clouded by fever, and when they met hers, there was recognition. A man returning, piece by piece, to the world. Amelia noticed the change in Noah too. The boy, once hesitant, began to peek into the shed more often. At first it was only to bring a glass of water or pass along something Amelia asked for. But soon he lingered. One afternoon he entered holding his broken fire truck. The wheel had come loose again, and he looked at Liam with a mix of hope and shyness. Liam sat up slowly, still stiff, and reached for the toy. His large hands, though trembling, moved with surprising gentleness. He examined the axle, then asked in a quiet tone, "Do you mind if I try?" Noah glanced at his mother, who gave a small nod, and then watched as Liam used a screwdriver from a nearby drawer. With careful patience, he clicked the wheel back into place. Noah's face lit up instantly. "Thanks, Uncle Liam," he chirped, the words slipping out naturally. He dashed outside, the toy racing across the porch. Amelia froze at the sound. Uncle Liam. The name had fallen so easily from Noah's lips, as if the man had always been there. When she turned back, she saw Liam's expression soften, a look of both wonder and pain crossing his face. He didn't correct the boy. Instead, he let the name settle around him like a fragile gift. Later that evening, Amelia found Noah's old jacket neatly mended, the tear at the shoulder stitched so cleanly it was nearly invisible. She carried it into the shed where Liam sat, by the lantern, a steaming cup of tea in his hands. "You sewed this," she said softly. He looked up, almost shy. "My mother taught me when I was a boy. She said some things can still be fixed, even when they look broken." His eyes lingered on hers for a moment, and she felt the weight of the words settle deeper than he intended. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Amelia sat at the small kitchen table across from Liam. The dishes from their simple meal of chicken, stew and bread still sat between them. She hesitated, then spoke. "Thank you. Not just for the jacket, but for trying. For being here." Liam's voice was low, steady but edged with something raw. "You were the only one who cared. If you hadn't stopped that day..." He trailed off, his hands tightening around the mug. "I don't know that I'd still be breathing." Amelia studied him, the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of betrayal pressing on his shoulders. She knew what it was to feel helpless. Slowly, she shared her own story. "My husband had cancer. It came fast. 6 months from the diagnosis to the end. I cared for him every day. I washed him. I fed him. I held his hand when the pain was too much. And I promised him he'd never face it alone. That's why I didn't walk past you in the woods, Liam. That's why I stayed. No one should be left to suffer alone." Liam's gaze locked on hers, his eyes glistening. He reached across the table, placing his rough hand over hers. It wasn't a gesture of romance, not yet. It was the touch of shared grief of two people who knew the cost of loss. His voice broke raw and honest. "I would have died in that hole. But I didn't, because you listened, because you cared." A silence settled between them, not heavy but alive, like the pause before something new begins. Amelia looked down at their hands, then back at him. In that moment, she realized the man sitting across from her wasn't just a stranger she had saved. He was someone who understood the quiet ache she carried in her own heart. Over the next days, Liam grew more present in the cottage. He sat with Noah, telling stories from his childhood, careful to leave out the shadows of betrayal. He helped with small repairs, tightening a hinge, fixing a loose step on the porch. Each act was simple, but Amelia noticed how Noah's laughter filled the house again, how her son leaned easily against Liam as if he had always belonged there. At night, when the lanterns dimmed and the house grew still, Amelia sat awake longer than she needed to, listening. She could hear Noah's gentle breathing in the next room, and from the shed the quiet sounds of a man refusing to give up. A man who had been buried by those he trusted most, but who was slowly learning to live again. And though she didn't say it out loud, Amelia knew the truth in her heart. She was learning too. Liam's body grew stronger each day, but his spirit carried a storm. The quiet evenings in the shed had shifted. The place that once smelled of dust and mothballs now held papers, scribbled notes, and fragments of memory laid out on the workbench. Amelia often found him hunched over his notebook, his brow furrowed, forcing himself to recall details he had tried to bury along with his pain. One night, Amelia brought in a tray of soup and bread. Liam barely touched it, his eyes fixed on a list of names and dates scrawled across a page. "This was the night of the gala," he murmured, tapping the paper. Clement and Vera were whispering, too close, too secretive. "I didn't want to see it then. I see it now." Amelia set the tray down gently. "You need to eat," she reminded him, but she didn't press further. She could see his mind was turning, piecing together a puzzle that had nearly cost him his life. In the days that followed, Liam shared more. Slowly at first, then with a determination that seemed to fuel him more than food. He told her about the company he built, a healthcare initiative meant to bring affordable medicine to rural communities. "We thought we were changing lives," he said one afternoon, eyes heavy with both pride and regret. "But while I dreamed about saving families, they dreamed about stealing everything." It wasn't just the betrayal that cut deep. It was the discovery that people he trusted had forged his name on contracts, siphoned funds, and quietly prepared for his downfall. "Clement handled the accounts," Liam said, his voice sharp. "And Vera, she knew every secret I had. Between the two of them, they had the perfect weapon, me. They buried me once with paperwork before they buried me in the ground." Amelia listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She knew her role wasn't to fix it, but to be steady, to let him release the poison one memory at a time. "So, what now?" she asked softly. Liam looked at her, his eyes no longer fogged by fever but alive with fire. "Now I find proof. Not just for me. For Julian. He deserves the truth about his father. He deserves to know I didn't walk away." From that day, their shed became something new. Amelia brought in a corkboard from the attic, and together they pinned scraps of paper, timelines, and old receipts Liam remembered by heart. Each pushpin was a piece of his stolen life slowly reclaimed. Amelia surprised herself with how quickly she became part of it. She organized his scribbled notes, searched through her old laptop for any mention of news about his company, and helped him lay out events in order. She didn't fully understand the corporate schemes, but she understood people, their patterns, their motives. "If they thought you were gone," she pointed out one evening, "they probably got careless. People always do when they believe no one is watching." Liam looked at her with something like awe. "You're right. They thought I'd never open my eyes again. That will be their mistake." Still, not every night was strategy and planning. There were nights when fear crept back into his eyes, when the weight of betrayal pressed too heavily on his chest. Amelia recognized it. She had seen that same look in her husband's face in the hospital, the quiet question of whether it was worth fighting. She sat by him during those moments, her voice calm and steady. "You're not alone, not anymore." It wasn't just words. Her presence anchored him. And he anchored her too. For years, Amelia had carried her grief like a shadow, raising Noah in a quiet world where she didn't expect new beginnings. Now, in the fragile trust of a man who had been broken, she felt her own heart stirring again. One late evening, while Noah slept soundly inside the cottage, Liam traced the bruises at his temple with a shaking hand. "They tried to silence me with one swing," he said bitterly, "but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" Amelia asked. He looked at her with a steady gaze. "They buried me, but I was still alive. And now I'll dig up every secret they thought they had hidden." Amelia placed her hand gently on his shoulder, her touch warm against his resolve. "And you won't have to do it alone." For the first time, Liam didn't argue. He simply nodded, his jaw set but his eyes softer than they had been in weeks. The battle ahead was dangerous. Amelia knew it, and so did he. But in that quiet shed, with the lantern burning low and the night pressing against the windows, they made an unspoken pact. Liam would fight for his truth. Amelia would stand by his side, and together, they would make sure betrayal would never have the last word. The plan took shape in careful steps, not in anger but in clear light. Liam met with a trusted former colleague who agreed to help review records. Names and numbers began to line up like tracks in snow. Transfers appeared where they should not be. Signatures looked perfect until the dates told a different story. One authorization was stamped 2 weeks after Liam vanished, a quiet line on a page that proved he could not have signed it. Amelia printed everything and slid each page into a clear sleeve. She checked the order twice, then a third time. Liam watched her hands work and felt the steadiness he had been missing return to his chest. They chose a setting that would force the truth into the open. A private charity evening in the city. held in honor of Liam's supposed memory. Vera and Clement had planned it as a public farewell to a man they had tried to erase. Invitations went out with soft paper and heavy ink. Amelia kept her voice level as she called the venue about seating. Liam's ally quietly informed the authorities and a small team from the press. No drama, no risk to bystanders, just a room, a stage, and the truth. On the afternoon of the event, Amelia walked through the cottage with a list in her hand. She tucked a spare phone charger in her bag, checked Noah's overnight backpack, and gave their neighbor clear instructions for the evening. Noah hugged Liam around the waist and told him to be brave. Liam kissed the top of the boy's head and promised he would be home for breakfast. Amelia heard her late husband in those words and felt her throat tighten. Then she nodded and said they would all come home together. The venue was a glass hall that threw back the city lights. Inside, a long screen hung behind a polished podium. Soft music drifted, glasses chimed. People spoke in low voices about legacy and vision. Vera arrived first in a black dress that drew eyes. She moved like a person who believed every door should open for her. Clement followed in a navy suit, shaking hands, smiling at board members who did not know the cost of his smile. They did not look over their shoulders. They believed the story they had told the world would hold. Amelia stood at the back with a small folder pressed to her side. She wore a plain dark dress and kept to the wall. Liam waited in a quiet side room with the ally who had helped gather records. He breathed slowly, counting to 4 in and 4 out, a trick the doctor had shown him for panic. He stared at his hands and saw dirt under his nails from the day Amelia pulled him into the light. He let the memory steady him. He touched the cornflower pin on his lapel, a reminder of his son. He squeezed the head of a small toy fire truck in his pocket. He thought of the boys, and of the kitchen lantern back home. The host stepped to the microphone and asked for attention. The hall grew still. He spoke about loss and service, about a life cut short and a mission carried on. Then he announced a short video in memory of a leader the community had loved. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. A picture appeared that none of them expected to see. The first image was a quiet forest, late afternoon light slipping through tall pines. Then the camera showed hands pushing away leaves, a rusted vent, a latch. A hatch lifted and a man's face turned to air. There was no shock image, no violence, just a man breathing for the first time after a long night. A soft murmur moved through the room like a wind. The next frames brought documents across the screen, clear and simple. A contract with a clean signature, followed by a calendar date that made that signature impossible. Bank transfers from shell companies, each arrow pointing to accounts tied to a law office, and then to a personal card. A short audio clip played, a voice confirming a forged authorization and naming who had given the order. Each piece was short and factual. Each piece fit the next. When the video ended, the screen went dark. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the building's air. Then the side doors opened and Liam stepped into the hall under quiet lights. There was no music. He walked with a slow, even gait, shoulders square, chin lifted, the cornflower catching the glow. People drew back to let him pass. Vera's glass tapped the floor once and rolled under a table. Clement stopped mid-step and stared as if a wall had moved. Liam reached the stage and placed a thick folder on the podium. He did not raise his voice. He said his name, first and last, and thanked the people who had come to honor a death that had never been true. He said he had built a company to serve families who needed help, and he said that trust is the first duty in any work that cares for human life. He opened the folder and described the documents in plain words. He named the dates, he named the accounts. He showed the chain of custody for each file so there could be no claim of editing. He did not accuse with adjectives. He let the facts stand. 2 investigators stepped forward at the edge of the room. They did not rush. They spoke quietly to Vera and to Clement and asked them to come with them to answer questions. There was no scene. Vera tried to speak but found no sentence that could carry her, and the room began to turn away. Clement looked smaller in the space than he ever had. The investigators walked with them toward a side exit. The host thanked the guests for their calm, and asked them to remain seated. Liam's hands shook only after it was done. Backstage, he sat for a moment with his head lowered, then lifted his eyes when he felt Amelia's hand on his shoulder. She had tears she had not let fall until then. He took a breath and let it out in a long line. She told him it was over. He said no, not over, but started. He stood and the two of them walked through a service corridor to the quiet street where their car waited. On the drive home, the city lights fell behind them and the road turned dark and familiar. Liam called their neighbor on speaker and thanked her. He told Noah they were on their way. The boy asked if the plan had worked. Liam said yes, and his voice warmed when he said it. Amelia's fingers rested near the gear shift and his hand covered hers for a second. No big speech, just a press that said thank you, and a silence that said I am here. They reached the cottage close to midnight. The porch light made a small warm circle on the snow. Inside, the house smelled like bread and soap. Noah woke and came down the hall in socked feet. He hugged them both at once. Liam crouched and told him they would go to the school tomorrow, not to hide, but to plan the day he would bring Julian home. Amelia poured tea and set the mug in front of Liam. He curled his hands around it as if it were a hearth. He stood then and walked to the doorway between the boys' rooms. He looked at the space where a picture now hung of the four of them on the back step. He touched the frame and felt the small nick in the wood that he had never sanded down. The night outside was cold, but the house was warm, and for the first time since the forest, he felt not only safe, but ready. Part of him had been buried, and now it was standing. The next morning he would dress in a plain coat and carry a small bouquet of blue cornflowers. He would keep his promise and go to his son. Morning came soft and pale, the kind of light that makes a promise without words. Liam dressed in a plain coat and tucked the small bouquet of blue cornflowers into the crook of his arm. Amelia poured coffee into a travel cup and set a hand on his sleeve. He nodded once, steady enough. Noah ran out with his backpack and hugged Liam around the waist. Be brave, he said. Liam smiled and answered that today was the day he would keep a promise. The school sat on a rise above a long green field. A receptionist looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the man who had been shown on every screen the night before. She led them to a quiet room with 2 chairs and a window that let in winter light. A head teacher came in, kind but careful, and asked for a moment to confirm what he already knew. Liam placed a simple folder on the desk. Inside were copies of the papers that had cleared the way. The teacher read, nodded, and made a call. His voice softened as he spoke the boy's name. Footsteps sounded in the hall. A 12-year-old boy stepped into the doorway, hair a little too long, shoulders held small the way children hold themselves when they have been brave for too long. His eyes flicked to the cornflowers, then to the face he knew from pictures, on a nightstand, then to the hands he had missed at dinner for many nights. The book in his grip slid to the floor. Dad, he said. It was not loud. It was a word that had waited and waited. Liam stood so fast the chair scraped the tile. He did not speak right away. He opened his arms like a door. The boy crossed the room and went into that space that belonged to him. The hug was full and shaking and quiet, a soundless shout. The head teacher closed the door without a speech and left them with the window and the light. They sat on the low sofa. Liam said he was sorry for every night that hurt. He said he had tried to get back every day. He said the cornflowers were because he remembered a field by the river where they once walked and counted clouds. Julian listened with both hands around the flowers. His voice was small but sure when he said he had kept the rocket kit on the shelf because he knew they would still build it. The teacher returned with a short list of next steps and a promise to help with anything needed. Paperwork could wait. A day. A child does not always have to wait. They drove home by the long road through pines. Amelia watched father and son in the mirror. The shy glances, the little half-smiles that kept showing up and running away. At the cottage, Noah had tied a blue ribbon to the porch rail and made a sign that said, "Welcome home," with a crooked star in the corner. He stood on the steps and tried not to bounce. Julian stepped out and Noah hugged him with both arms at once. Brother was not the word they used, but it was in the way their shoulders dropped. Inside, soup steamed on the stove and bread warmed in a towel on the counter. The boys took bowls to the table like a team. They traded stories about fire trucks and favorite snacks and a teacher who wears funny ties. Liam sat at the edge at first like a guest. Amelia moved a chair a little closer and set a spoon in front of him. By the time the bowls were empty, he had told a joke that made both boys slap the table. That afternoon, they opened the rocket box on the kitchen table. The thin paper guide showed lines and numbers. Liam read each step and let the boys do the work. Noah pressed fins into place. Julian set the cone and tied the string. Amelia cut a piece of tape and handed it over without a word. When the rocket stood finished, straight and white, the boys leaned back as if they were looking up at a real launch pad. Liam lifted it once, tested the weight, and set it down like something that could carry hopes without breaking. The next, days were full and plain. They met with kind officers who took statements in a small room with a plant in the corner and a bowl of mints on the desk. They walked through the process with a lawyer who spoke in clear words and did not hide behind hard terms. Friends from Liam's old work sent notes that said, "We are sorry, and we are ready to help you rebuild anything you choose." Liam thanked them and said he would build something new. He rented a little room above the library and set a desk by the window. He called the new effort Reborn. The name was simple. The work was simple too. A phone line for people who had been pushed aside. Meetings at kitchen tables to talk through problems one by one. Small grants for people who needed a start after loss. A list of volunteers who could drive, cook, fix a step, or write a letter that needed the right words. Amelia handled the first calls with a notebook and gentle questions. She wrote names, slowly, and spelled them back with care. Liam met people where they were and looked them in the eye until they believed he saw them. At home, the shed was no longer a place of fear. It became a workshop for school projects, a space for mending jackets and building a birdhouse that Noah painted red. The boys made a chart for chores and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet that looked like a lemon. On Saturday mornings, they took a short walk to the market. Liam bought fruit and waved off people who tried to talk about the news. He did not want to be a story. He wanted to be a father who carried a bag of apples and reminded boys to look both ways. Winter grew deeper. One bright day arrived with a sky so clear it looked washed. The field by the school stood firm and dry. They carried the rocket and the small launcher across the frost-tipped grass. Liam checked the angle and the line. Julian held the controller and Noah did the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket surged up with a clean shout of sound and a white thread of smoke. 3 faces tilted skyward. Amelia clapped once and then pressed a hand to her heart. The parachute opened, and the rocket came down easy. The boys chased it with quick steps and lifted it together like a prize. Liam laughed low and covered his eyes for a second as if to keep the good in. Spring came early. Liam bought the whitewashed house at the edge of the woods because he wanted to live where he was found. He said a person should see the place that saved him when he leaves in the morning. He taught the boys to tie small knots and to patch a tire and to listen for owls at night. Amelia planted herbs in a long box on the sill. She saved the first leaves of yarrow for a small jar that would sit on the shed shelf to remind her that care can be both old and new. On a mild evening, the town gathered at the community center to mark the start of Reborn. There were folding chairs and a string of lights, and a banner that looked hand-painted because it was. Liam kept his speech short. He said they tried to take his name and his work and even his air. He said what pulled him back was not a board or a bank. It was a woman who heard a voice no one else heard and chose to stop. He pointed to Amelia and thanked her. He pointed to the boys and said, "This is the reason a person fights." The room was quiet in a way that meant people were listening with their whole selves. That night, the 4 of them sat on the back step with bowls of strawberries. The sky turned a soft blue that always means the first cricket will begin any minute. Noah leaned on Liam's shoulder. Julian leaned on Amelia's arm. A picture hung inside above the hall table. The same step. The same 4 people, sunlight on their faces, no one posing. The shed light glowed behind them like a small lighthouse. The forest beyond was only trees again, not a place of fear. They did not speak about the past. They did not need to. It was there, but it no longer held the last word. A whisper under. The ground had become a voice at a table. A buried heartbeat had become a home that held steady. In a world that can look away, one person had listened and another had kept breathing. That was enough to change a life. That was enough to build a family. The boys asked if they could launch the rocket again next weekend. Liam said yes and told them to check the fins before bedtime. Amelia stood and gathered the empty bowls. She looked at the three of them and felt the quiet rise in her like a tide. The house behind her was small and bright. The future in front of them was simple and brave. The wind moved through the pines and sounded like water. Somewhere a first cricket started sure and clear, and the four of them went inside.